Welcome to Transmission Podcast. I'm your host, Cecilia Lynn Jacobs. For the next little while, we invite you to speculate on the possibility of life on Proxima b, the closest known planet outside of our solar system that has the potential to support life. In each episode, we question what would happen if we suddenly knew we were no longer alone in the universe, and what that would mean for humanity to become an interstellar civilization. Please, stay close.
So once I started working in SETI and METI, it's actually probably the most contentious research area that I've ever gotten into, between Colonization and commercialization and one-way missions and spending on space. This very question is really emotive, and I didn't realize that until I sort of wandered into the discussion. And I think I was a bit naive initially in not appreciating how inflammatory it is. It's always been my opinion that we should try to make contact, but there are a lot of people who strongly disagree with this. My reasons for it are twofold. First of all, I actually don't think that we will make contact in the history of humanity. Not because I don't think that some sort of extraterrestrial intelligence will or has evolved in the past. I think it's arrogant to think that we are the only ones. But in the timeline of the universe and the space of the universe, I don't think that we would develop our technologies to a point where we would overlap. In my opinion, the reason we should be transmitting is partly to have the discussion about what we would transmit. So it's more about looking out in order to look back in and have those discussions about how we represent humanity, who represents humanity. I think those are fascinating philosophical questions that are worth addressing and taking to the point of actually transmitting. I'm Dr. Jill Stuart, and I'm an academic based at the London School of Economics. I'm an expert in the politics, ethics, and law of outer space exploration and exploitation, and I'm also one of the directors of METI International.
On March 22nd, 2017, Transmission Podcast was invited to attend a day-long conference at Muséum National D'Histoire Naturelle in Paris about the question, "What is life?" hosted by METI International. Many of our listeners will be familiar with SETI, or Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. METI, METI, is Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It is similarly focused on research and discussion related to extraterrestrial life, but considers also what we would say and why we'd say it to aliens. In episodes 3 and 4, we discussed translation and possible responses to a confirmed extraterrestrial signal. We know that communication is going to be difficult. We are continually discovering non-human forms of communication right here on Earth, and we've yet to talk to dolphins or trees, both of which could be accomplished from the relative safety of our own planet. If we can't manage communication that is more or less right in front of us, let alone understand it, is there any hope to understanding someone or something that does not share millions of years of evolutionary history in a planetary context with us? It might be hard to be optimistic that we would even be able to understand a civilization that might not have DNA when we can't have a clear discourse with our closest cousins that share nearly all of our own genetic material. However, METI is not just about developing a relationship with our space pen pals. It's also about the philosophical questions that arise while considering what it means to be a part of an actively shared universe. The next day, we interviewed trustees of METI International and members of their advisory council. We asked them our questions and why they feel METI's work, though sometimes controversial, is important. Back to our conversation with METI International trustee Jill Stuart.
I feel that if we were to make contact, my assumption is that they would be benign. I think that if they have evolved to the point where they would have the technology to make contact with us, then they will, just from an evolutionary perspective, not have gone down the ultra-violent route. They would have had to have cooperated with each other enough to survive. So it's not that I think it's sort of a moral evolution, because teleologically I don't believe in sort of that moral linear progression, but more just a survival.
That cooperation is a key ingredient of survival and
long-term survival
and evolution.
Yes.
Of a species.
Yes, and in that case, if they have managed to survive that long in order to become more technologically advanced, I think there's a decent chance that they could help us. I think that we're going down a very dangerous path in terms of climate change and that sort of extinction level destruction potentially. And if they have managed to survive through that stage, then the thing is people who are against it say that it's too much of a risk because they might come and eat us. I think if we were to be able to make contact with them, it's too much of a risk not to, because otherwise I'm not convinced that humanity is going to
be able to pull through it by ourselves.
In terms of a delegation, I mean, that's fascinating. And who would go and how would we represent ourselves? Also, in terms of how we represent ourselves, just in terms of sending messages out. I mean, there's been various speculation. Carl Sagan addressed the issue in Contact, and of course new movies like Arrival, and there's another documentary film that was called The Encounter, I think, which also addressed this issue. And I don't know, I don't have any clear answers. It would be fascinating, certainly. My instinct tends to be towards a liberal amount of information or representation. So I'm not somebody, I don't really believe in whitewashing us or our history. I don't think there's any point in misrepresenting us. So I suppose ideally it would be sort of a diverse collection of people, some who are religious, some who are from, different parts of the world, a broader representation of us. And I feel the same way about what we send out, messages we send out. I would be tempted to just send them, the internet and say, this is who we are, warts and all. Yeah,
this has come up a lot, the idea of just putting the internet on the most intense thumb drive ever.
Yes.
And putting it in a little space bubble and just sending it off.
Yeah, I mean, some people are really uncomfortable with that. And with good reason, I suppose, in a way, too. It almost feels like it's fair to them because they need to know what they're dealing with. If they know our whole history, maybe they wouldn't want to come. And I'm not sure I'd blame them.
Do you think the internet is a good representation of human history and activity?
That is a good question, because it does tend to bring out the nastier side of people. I've certainly been on the sharp end of that.
Yeah, it's a very specific way. It's a very specific way of communicating. It's not the same thing as having a conversation with an actual human.
Yeah. I suppose in terms of what we can send out, it's the next best thing. Ideally, at that point, then they would want to engage in a conversation, so we could have that interactive aspect that you don't get from a one-way transmission. I mean, I suppose an alternative would be to, I don't know, I was going to say to cut out, the obnoxious comments at the bottom of all the articles and just sort of send, edit it. But I don't think that really, again, it's sort of warts and all for me. I think we may as well just give them the option of
see what happens.
Yeah. There are a couple of different pockets of elites, I suppose you could say, who I think have managed to steer the conversation in the past. Some of that is geographical, so obviously countries that have stronger space programs and telescopic arrays and that sort of thing are going to have more control over how we're potentially represented. The second would be the scientific community, simply because they've had access to the technology and also the expertise in terms of how to scientifically have a conversation that could potentially be understood in an interspecies context. So that tends to follow the lines of we need to use math and representations of atoms and so on that they would potentially understand in order to make sure that they recognize that it's an intelligent transmission. But I think we want to engage the wider public in their thoughts about what should be sent out and who should represent us. A lot of it, in my opinion, probably should continue to go through the United Nations, just because there's already a strong forum there for dealing with issues relating to outer space exploration and exploitation. And you have sort of the technical and the political representation. But I would like to see it expanded even further than that, so that, we're in an era where through things like Twitter and other social media forums that you kind of can cut out the middlemen and access people directly and their opinions directly. And so we would like to sort of crowdsource those opinions and get a sense of what people want in terms of representing them, representing us. Let's be honest, there might be a bit of chaos. I think that some groups of people would not react well. It would shake core belief systems, potentially shake core belief systems. It would suddenly mean, I think we have a sort of anthropocentric vision of the universe at present, where we are unique and we're special, and that there must be kind of a cause behind that. And so if we were to encounter another civilization, it would really throw all of those beliefs up into the air. I think there would probably be, you would have people who would be resistant, I think, to continuing the conversation because of fears about them being dangerous. And then I think you would also have people for whom it would make them very uncomfortable because it would undermine their, as you say, sort of religious beliefs. On the flip side, I would like to think that people talk about space exploration as giving us a greater cosmological perspective. So the so-called overview effect of going out and then looking back in and realizing that we are more of a collective, that there's no physical boundaries drawn on to many of our continents in the way that we're used to seeing them on maps and so on. To some degree, I think that's a bit exaggerated, a bit romanticized for the purposes of propaganda during the first space race, for example. But inevitably, if we were to suddenly find out that there was an other against us as a collective human self, it must impact on our identity, I would imagine. And again, this is where I think the whole project of METI itself is worthwhile, because it forces us to look at ourselves as a collective. I don't want to over-exaggerate that. Obviously, there's still a hell of a lot of conflict. And if we were to discover another, in some ways that might just reinforce differences amongst groups of people on Earth. Surely it would impact on our identity and how we see ourselves.
I think even imagining it is a useful practice.
Yes, that's very much the philosophy, I think, behind those of us who are in favor of doing METI, because it forces us to look at ourselves as a collective.
Yeah. In this world of a potential world of chaos and a lot of divisive thinking, and potentially including zero interest whatsoever, depending on the data that we got and the time gaps in between messages, do you think that it would make sense to send a delegation of people out?
I suppose it would depend on where. We'd be able to pinpoint the location of the transmission. So I suppose it would depend on practicalities of life expectancy and so on. My hunch is that sending an actual human delegation probably wouldn't make sense, just because they'll probably be too far for us to reach in a lifetime, and it would probably be more effective and efficient to continue to communicate electronically or robotically, unless, as in the scenario of contact with Carl Sagan, they were to send us a blueprint for some sort of a space-time shrinkage so that we could travel to them much faster. That would open up a whole different set of possibilities. But barring that, my sense would be that in the early stages, at least, it would make sense to just continue to communicate, to transmit, rather than to send an actual human presence. With regards to regulation, I think there's kind of a push and a pull between the technology and the laws. So I don't agree with technological determinism. The idea that things are inevitably going to happen because the technology